It's day 4 for previews for Lost Caverns of Ixalan, so let's get into it with one of the new cards from earlier this morning, Brass's Tunnel Grinder. This is a legendary artifact that says when it enters the battlefield, discard any number of cards and then draw that many cards +1. And at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, put a boar counter on the Tunnel Grinder, and then if there are 3 or more boar counters on it, remove them and transform it. You descend whenever a permanent goes to the graveyard from anywhere, and it turns into this land. Tech I keep butchering this. Tecatlan the Searing Rift is a legendary cave that says add red, and then if you cast a permanent spell using the mana produced by Tecatlan the Searing Rift, discover X, where X is the spell's mana value. So as long as you're tapping your stuff to cast spells with this, you get the new cascading ability discover on your spells equal to the mana cost of whatever you're doing. So the bigger the spell, the bigger the discover. So that's pretty fun. Then we have another one of the new rare dual lands that are in the set, Restless Ridgeline. It enters the battlefield taps for red or green, pay 4, it becomes a 3/4 red and green dinosaur until end of turn, and when it attacks, another attacking creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn, and you untap that creature. So it gives kind of like a pseudo vigilance to another creature when it attacks. Decent sized 3/4 body. Not 100% certain where it's going to see play unless you have a way to bump it up as well. Maybe in a dinosaur deck itself, but we'll see. Then we have Vraska's ship from the original Ixalan sets, the Belligerent. For 2, a blue and a red, you get a 5/5 vehicle that says when it attacks, create a treasure. Until end of turn, you can look at the top card of your library at any time, and you can play lands or cast spells from the top of your library, and it accrues for 3. So you get a good way to generate treasures in the appropriate colors. And it does pretty good stuff. You get to cast off the top of your deck. You can play lands off the top of your deck. If you stall out, you can kind of try to unstall your deck. There's some good stuff going on here. Here we have the first of the foreign cards that were previewed in the last day or so. This is Master's Guide Mural. I actually have a translation up over here so I don't mess this up. It is a 3 of white and a blue artifact that when it enters the battlefield, create a 4/4 white and blue golem artifact creature token with craft with artifact for 4 white, white, blue. So you can pay that cost and exile another artifact, and you get to flip it over into the other side, which is another artifact, Master's Manufactory. It taps to create a 4/4 blue and white artifact creature token. Activate only if it or another artifact entered the battlefield under your control this turn. So you're going to want to play this in an artifact deck, obviously. Cheap artifacts, you can just slam something down nice and cheap and quick, and you can just keep pumping these out. And if you have the ability to untap this with like manifold keys and that kind and voltaic keys and anything that does that for us, you just keep because all you need is one artifact coming into play. You don't need multiples. So as long as you play one and then just untap it several times in a turn, you can make multiple golems in one turn. I apologize now if I butcher the name of this. It's Sovereign Okinek Ahau. Not sure if that's 100%, but we'll go with it. For 2, a green and a white, you get a 3/4 Cat Noble with Ward 2 that says when it attacks, for each creature you control with power greater than the creature's base power, put a number of +1/+1 counters on that creature equal to the difference. Now, that's a very wordy template, but basically anything that either puts other counters on those creatures, anthem effects that give +1/+1, power doublers, things of that nature, you're going to have the ability to get those things higher than their base power. And then all you got to do then is swing with him, and all of a sudden, boom, there's counters flying everywhere. And that's really cool, especially if you have counter doubling stuff, which is in green white all the way. Like the Sovereign, I missed this card the other day. This is Unstable Glyph Bridge. For 3 white, white, you get an artifact that says when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it for each player, choose a creature they control of power 2 or less, and then destroy all creatures not chosen this way. And it crafts with an artifact for 3 and 2 white, and it flips over into Sand Swirl Wander Glyph. It's a 5/3 golem with flying, and then whenever an opponent casts a spell during their turn, they can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. And if they attack you, they can't cast spells this turn. So they get a choice. They either lock themselves out of being able to play anything for a turn so they can attack you, or they can't attack you, but they can still play their spells. So it's kind of the you get to choose your own adventure type thing if this thing sticks around. So there's going to be blue-white control decks that will probably play this to kind of slow you down even more while you're dealing with this thing. This one was just released in the last couple of hours. This is Ogier Pakpatik, Deepest Epoch. For 2 blue blue, you get a 4/3 flying god that grants instant spells cast from your hand Rebound, which means when you cast a spell, you exile it, and then the beginning of your next upkeep, you get to cast it again and not pay for it. And then if it dies, you return it transformed under your control with 3 time counters on it, and it becomes Temple of Cyclical Time. You can tap it for a blue and remove a time counter on it, and you can pay 2 and a blue, and then you can flip it over if it has no time counters on it and only as a sorcery. So granting rebound is really good, especially in formats like Commander, where there's singleton formats and you only get 1 copy of any given spell. So being able to clone your spells, copy your spells, however you want to phrase it, is a really good ability. And having that just be able to hit everything else is great. A deck that would really, really love this if you're playing it is Calamax the Storm Sire, because that deck is all about instants. So being able to cast your stuff twice as often with Calamax on the board is pretty busted, and that commander was already pretty messed up. Next up is what I regard as cheap beef. For 3 mana, you get a 6/6 dinosaur that says when you attack, if you don't control another dinosaur, you put a stun counter on the Pugnacious Hammer Skull, which means it won't untap during its next untap step. So this is in the vein of the Rotting Regisaurs of the world, where it's cheap, but it has a drawback attached to it. But this drawback's not nearly as bad. You're not discarding cards like you do to the Regisaur. This is all about just, okay, make sure you have another dinosaur on the board. And there's actually a lot of cheap, 3, 4 drop dinosaurs that you could curve this into, going from the 3 to the 4 slot. There's even some 2 drop stuff that is in the older set of Ixalan and things like that. So there's a lot of things we can do here with this for just cheap beatdown. Then we have another one of the new dual lands, Restless Anchorage. Enters tap, white blue tapper, pay 3. It becomes a 2/3 white and blue bird with flying. And whenever it attacks, you create a map token. And if you haven't seen anything on the map tokens yet, it's a token where you pay 1, tap, and sacrifice it to explore. Now, this is an interesting card because it can kind of go one of a couple ways. You can build like a dinosaur deck, you could do an artifact matters deck. There's a few things we can do here. This is Poetic Ingenuity. For 2 and a red, you get an enchantment that says whenever one or more dinosaurs you control attack, create that many treasure tokens. And when you cast an artifact, create a 3/1 dinosaur token. But that part only triggers once per turn. So you have some ways of getting dinosaurs just off of it on its own, and then you can attack and create treasures off of it, or you can actually put dinosaurs in your deck. I think this would probably work best in probably just a straight artifact deck, and have the bonus being that you create the treasure tokens off of the dinosaurs that are created off of this. But I could be proven wrong. A dinosaur deck may actually want this in order to ramp up into the bigger dinosaurs. Another of the foreign translations here, I have it brought up on the screen here. It's Inti Sun's Caretaker. For 1 and a red, you get a human knight 2/2 that says whenever you attack, you may discard a card. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. That creature gains trample until end of turn. And whenever you discard 1 or more cards, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until your next end step. So if you have like discard draw, impulse stuff, faithless looting, that kind of stuff, this will trigger let you go ahead and exile and play. You can do the +1/+1 counter on itself. You can do the +1/+1 counter on other creatures. There's a variety of ways that this could work out. Dinosaur decks may want this just for theme. Uh, or you can play it in a Knights deck for Knights Matter. There's a bunch of different things that can go with this particular card. The next card could be taken kind of rudely depending on how you say it. This is Get Lost. For 1 and a white. Destroy target creature, enchantment, or planeswalker. Its controller creates 2 map tokens at instant speed. So this is being heavily compared to Fateful Absence, where you destroy target creature, but they get a clue token. In this case, you give them 2 map tokens, but it also spreads out the number of targets it can hit. Instead of being restricted to just creatures, you can also hit enchantments and planeswalkers too. So it has a much wider application. Plus, the explorers may or may not actually net them cards. At best, they might get a +1/+1 counter on a creature, and then they get to dump the card if they don't want it. So they get a little bit of card selection, but they're not guaranteed to actually get an extra card off of the map tokens like they are with the clue token. So it's hard to tell what much better or worse this is without actually playing it, but we'll see. Now, this creature is for those who appreciate the big-butted creatures in Magic the Gathering. This is Bedrock Tortoise. For 3 and a green, you get a 0/6 turtle that says, as long as it's your turn, creatures you control have hexproof, and each creature you control with toughness greater than power assigns combat damage equal to the toughness rather than the power. So, your wall type decks and things like that. As long as you have a way to shut off the defender part of the cards, you can actually use this to help attack, and it's a I mean, it's a 6/6 for 4, so it's pretty underrated in all essence. So that's pretty good. I kind of like how that goes, and we'll see if how much this gets added into decks that like the bigger toughness side of things. Thank goodness this card is only an uncommon because this is probably going to see a lot of play in Commander. This is Pit of Offerings. It enters tapped and it enters the battlefield. You can exile up to 3 target cards from graveyards, taps for a colorless, or it taps for 1 mana of any color that is of the exiled card. So this is kind of like a mini Bajuka Bog. Now, Bajuka Bog is restricted to black decks only that hits the entire graveyard. This one only hits 3 cards, but this can go in any color deck. So this actually gives access to graveyard exile without sacrificing a spell card in your deck for just the slot of a land. So this is a really good card, and I see this seeing lots of play. Now, this card is seeing a lot of chatter on Twitter today. The CEDH community, the modern community, there's a lot of people loving this card, and they think it's going to be their savior. So let's take a look and see what it does. I got to get to the translation. Tishana's Tidebinder. It's a 3/2 Merfolk Wizard with Flash that when it enters the battlefield, counter up to 1 target activated or triggered ability. If an artifact, creature, or planeswalker ability is countered this way, that permanent loses all abilities until the Tidebinder leaves the battlefield. So people are like, oh, I can shut down Fury, I can shut down Orcish Bowmasters, I can shut down the One Ring. There's a lot of things here that people are thinking this is going to help shut down. I can see the One Ring getting shut off pretty good in multiple formats. Fury is a big problem in modern, but I don't see this being the catch-all answer for that. Yes, you can catch the ETB trigger off of the thing and stop it, but those decks also run ways of reanimating Fury and flickering Fury with like ephemerates and stuff like that in some versions of the builds. There's a bunch of different things that those decks do that I think will get around this. But shutting down the One Ring, heck yeah, I can see this doing some numbers on people. Then the last card I have for you guys today is Braided Net. For 2 and a blue, you have an artifact that enters with 3 net counters on it. Tap, remove a net counter from it. Tap another non-land permanent. Its activated abilities can't be activated for as long as it remains tapped, and then you can pay 1 and a blue and exile another artifact to craft it and flip it over into its other side. Braided Quipu. I, I am terrible at some of these pronunciations. 3 and a blue, tap, draw a card for each artifact you control, then put the braided Quipu into its owner's library, third from the top, so you can reset it back to the other side to recast it, put net counters back on it, and keep tapping stuff down. The Hilda deck would love this card for tapping stuff down. You can do this in artifact decks where you're trying to slow stuff down and then draw a bunch of cards for all the artifacts you control. There's a lot of applications that this one's going to have for different varying types of decks. I'd probably try it maybe like a Brea deck that isn't like competitively geared. We'll see what happens with this one. That said, that's what I have for you guys today in terms of the Ixalan previews. Keep an eye out. The next one I'm going to put out is probably on Monday. Tomorrow is going to be my Spider Brawloween deck, and then I'm going to have another Brawloween deck on Halloween Day. So until then, we'll see you in the next video.